Hey everybody, and welcome back to another fun and exciting geometry class. In this lesson, we'll be talking about 7.2 and 7.3, kind of combining them into one lesson. What we're doing in this lesson is basically just going over the trig functions. You say, what in the world's a trig function? Well, again, if you haven't had Algebra 2, then you might not know this. Maybe you've seen it a little bit in Algebra 1 or even in 8th grade, but you may just not be clear on what it is. So that's what we'll be doing here, and this should prepare you for Algebra 2 and then your classes after that. So let's go ahead and jump down here and look at the screen, and this is on page 286 in your book, 286. Your book is a little outdated. I say a little outdated, maybe a lot outdated. It's given it to you in charts and different things. We're going to be using a calculator today, so make sure that you have your scientific calculators with you ready to go, and you can practice some of this as I'm doing it. All right, the ratios of the sides in relationship to angle A, okay, we'll just call it angle A being like the angle we're using, the angle we're working with, okay? So they are called trigonometric ratios or trig functions. Most of the time you hear people call them trig functions or trigonometric functions, trig ratios. You just don't hear it as much. So trig functions. What is a trig function? The trig functions are found on scientific and graphic calculators. So if you go here to my scientific calculator, I have the trig functions right here. It's sin, cos, and tan. Each one of these three things means something different, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But you need to know where to find them on your calculator. All calculators are different, so make sure that you check that out and find out where you can find that on your calculator. All right, let's go ahead and look down here at this triangle that I have written. Now, this is very similar to the one that we used in the last lesson. We have our angle A. In the last lesson, we kind of extended this up and we did some of these different triangles. It's going to be, here's the thing, that the point of that first lesson is to tell you that this angle here is going to have all of the same trig functions because they're all ratios, okay? So the ratios that we find will work for any of the triangles that match this angle right here. Now, another thing, remember, we have to be in right triangles. That's a key. Trigonometry only works, well, I say only, but basically only works in right triangles. There's other ways that you can do the trig functions with non-right triangles, but there's a lot more math involved in it. So for what we're doing here, we're only dealing with right triangles. Okay, so now what we want is we want to identify what we're looking at here. This is the right angle, right? So let's call this C, and we'll call this one B up here. Now, don't forget that this one across from here, we always called it little letter A. This one over here, we always called it little letter B. And this one over here, we always called it little letter C. Okay, now, we also called this one over here, C was always the hypotenuse. I'm going to abbreviate that HYP, okay? So this one is always the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always, always, always across from C. Super important to remember. Now, these two over here can kind of change. It doesn't matter if you call one A and one B, typically. But when you have this angle specified, you say that is angle A. Then the one across from angle A is typically labeled small letter A. So we're just going to stay with that. Now, in this case, this is the opposite, okay? I've used that word quite a bit. This is the opposite, so we're going to call this OPP right here, opposite, okay? Now, this one over here needs a name too, okay? We're not just going to call it side B. We're going to call this is going to be called the adjacent, ADJ, adjacent. Now, what does adjacent mean? Adjacent means, we've already talked about this, you should know this, it's like when we had two angles, right, and it's sharing a side. This is the adjacent side, meaning that two angles are sharing that side. In other words, it's the side that both of them touch. So the adjacent to A is the one that is actually touching side A. Okay, so B in this case is adjacent to angle A. Now, what if we were talking about angle B? What if we kind of changed our focus there and we focused on angle B? Well, watch. Now this becomes the opposite, and then this one becomes the adjacent. So you do have to pay attention to which angle you're referring to in trigonometry. In this case, we are referring to A. So this small letter A is the opposite, and this small letter B is the adjacent. This one is always the hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. Right now you're thinking, come on, you're boring me. I already know all this stuff. Okay, but we need to lay that groundwork just in case some of you have never seen this before, or you've only seen it once or twice and you just kind of don't remember it real well. So let's kind of go on now and let's talk about the three functions. These are the three functions that we identified on our calculator. Sine, abbreviated sin, okay? It's not a sin to touch that button on your calculator, okay? God's not going to judge you for touching the sin button, okay? It's not what we're talking about. Sine, okay? So some of you are like, come on, enough with the dad jokes. All right, sorry. And then the next one is cosine, and then the last one is called tangent, T-A-N. Now, I told you that these were relationships. Let's go back. These are trigonometric ratios, trigonometric functions of what? Of angle A. So the sine is, and I'll write this in this green color, so the sine is considered the opposite over the hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. That's sine. Okay? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, so we're going to take this one, the adjacent, and put it over the hypotenuse. Again, they're ratios. Okay, what is a ratio? You should know that, but a ratio is a fraction. It's a fraction that compares two things. That's all we're doing. We're making a fraction with things that are in reference to angle A. The adjacent over the hypotenuse, that ratio is called the cosine. Okay, and then the tangent is the last one, and tangent is the opposite, and that is over the adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. All right, so there are your three trigonometric functions: sine, cosine, and tangent. Opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and opposite over adjacent. Now, you need to know these very well. You need to know these so well. I mean, I don't know what you need to do. Take them out for dinner. Call them your BFF. I don't know what you need to do here, but you need to memorize these. You need to learn these. You need to hug them and love them, okay? Because these are so important as you're going forward in your next math classes. So make sure that you know those. Let me give you a little way to help you to remember those. We're going to learn SOHCAHTOA. All right, that's what you do when it's late at night and you got the lights off and you bump your toe on the bed, right? You better go soak your toe because it's going to swell up if you don't, okay? I don't know. I'm just trying to give you a way to remember it. Okay, what is SOHCAHTOA? So is sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Ka is cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And toa is tangent, and that is opposite over adjacent. All right, so there it is. There are your trigonometric functions. Make sure that you know those. Very, very important as you're going forward. When you have the angle, use the sine, cosine, and tangent button. This is where I'm going away from your book a little bit here because your book is just, it's very dated. Nobody, in exercise 7.2, it says to use a table on page. I'm like, what? Who uses a table? Nobody uses a table. Everybody uses calculators these days, so use your calculator. Get used to using your calculator. So let's go ahead and take out the calculator, and here's what we want to do. We want to go ahead and we're just going to hit the sine button, and everybody's calculator works differently. Sometimes on some types of calculators, you might have to input the 38 degrees first and then hit sine. On mine, I hit sine, and then I put in 38, and it's degrees, okay? The calculator knows it's degrees. In fact, we're in D mode, which is degrees, so that's important. And then we're going to hit equals, and it's going to give us an answer. Now, typically, these are rounded off to the thousandth, so 3 decimal places. So we're going to round this to 0.616. 0.616 is the sine of 38 degrees. Now let's go back up here. What did that mean? Here's what it meant. The sine of, let's say that A equals 36 degrees, okay? Well, the ratio of sine opposite this one over this one, and I don't know what it is, but let's say that this one is, let's say that A equals, the opposite equals 7, and the hypotenuse equals, I don't know, 21. Okay, that's not going to come out to this, but that's the idea. When you solve this ratio right here, when you solve that, when you divide that out, it gives you this answer right here. That's all your calculator is doing. It's taking that ratio and figuring out what it is. All right, the next one is a cosine problem. So we're going to grab our calculator again, and we're going to hit the cosine button this time, and we're going to hit 62, and then we'll just hit equals, and we'll get 0.4694, so 0.469, 0.469. There we go. It's that easy. Next one is a tangent problem, and we'll hit tangent this time, and it's 47 degrees. And that equals 1.072. 1.072. In your next class, probably Algebra 2, definitely pre-calculus, you will figure out what's called the limit of sine, cosine, and tangent. Here's what I mean by that. Tangent can be more than 1. Notice these ones are both under 1. Sine and cosine are limited by the number 1. They both have to be less than the number 1. They're bigger than 0, and they're less than 1. You can have all kinds of other things kind of enter into this. You might have some negative numbers here, different things like that, but that's for your next class to kind of figure out, and we'll go from there. But that's the basics of how to figure those out. So now here's the question. What happens if I know what the sine is? Can I figure out the angle? So check this out. When you are looking for the angle, use the sine -1 button. This means inverse sine or arc sine. It's the same thing. I'm just giving you some vocabulary there. You don't need to know that. But that sine -1 button on your calculator is usually the shift function. All right, so let's go back to the calculator and let's look here. I know it's a little bit hard to see maybe, but the sine button, in yellow, it says sine -1. On cosine, it says cosine -1, and on tangent, it says tangent -1. So we have to hit the shift button, and then we hit the sine button, and notice it says sine -1. That's what we're looking for. And now we're going to put in 0.4695 and hit equal, and we're going to get 28. So that equals 28 degrees. Now I want to prove this to you. Let's go back up to this one. We had that the sine of 616 is 38. Now, there's always some rounding off in these, and it's never like an exact thing, because remember, we had to round off all these numbers to the nearest thousandth. But let's do this. Let's try to type in shift sine, so that's sine -1, and let's do the 616 and see if we get the 38. 0.616 equals 38.02. So if we round that off, we got our 38. So it does work going both ways. All right, so let's try this one. Let's try this cosine one. So hit the shift -1, and we're going to type in 0.1045 and hit equals, and we get 84. That's an 84 degree angle. 84 degrees. And then we'll do tangent, and then we'll be done with this lesson. So let's clear this back out. Shift tangent this time, tangent -1, and then we're going to put 1.4281, and that equals 54.9, so that's going to be a 55. 5 degrees. All right, that easy. So that's all I have for you in this lesson. Hopefully you kind of learned something there as you were connecting geometry to the next phase, which is Algebra 2, trigonometry, pre-calculus, that kind of thing. So what you'll need when you do that is you will need to know how to use the calculator to get these trig functions. And you might say, that's really easy. I'm glad you think it's easy because I think trig is easy and I think you're going to like trig. So don't get scared just because it's a big word, right? Trig is not that bad. Don't be scared by it. You'll do fine. All right. So keep working on these and keep studying. Keep working on that calculator skill. Make sure that you know where all these buttons are, how to use these. Practice some of these. Okay. That's all I've got for you. Hope you have a good one. See you next time. Bye bye.